She was a teenage girl from the slums of Mexico. Now, this teenage girl would claim that she wasn't human. She was in fact an immortal goddess. And her followers, they believed her without question. And what came next is absolutely bone-chilling. Blood rituals, human sacrifice, a cult so disturbing that it was buried from the public memory for decades. This is the disturbing, bone-chilling story of Magdalena Solís, the High Priestess of Blood. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. The makeup here is usually cute, the crimes, they're not. But luckily for me, the only thing more questionable than my contour or my lip choice today is our justice system and how it handles some of the most depraved monsters on this planet. If you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper who comes on here twice a week, every single week, on a Wednesday and Sunday, and I yap about a true crime case that is keeping me up at night, because if it's on my mind, it needs to be on yours. If true crime is your jam, and if you've stumbled on this video, I believe it is, please make sure you subscribe, get that notification bell on, because I'm here for you every single week. And this case today is so insane, we're all going to be doing our closed mouth gasp. So without any further rambling or any further ado, let's get into the crazy ass case of Magdalena Solís. Now, if at this moment in time you're thinking this cult could be robes and flower crowns, baby gal, it's not that type of cult. This is something much more sinister and involves blood drinking, brutality, ritual sacrifices that honestly we can't get on board with. And I mean, this woman, she kinda makes Charles Manson look like a yoga instructor. So, you know, there's that. Now, in this case, there are at least 8 confirmed murders, but it's believed to be closer to 20. And this was all done under the rule of this young woman who was so delusional and so dangerous. Everyone just fell at her feet and did as she said. But before Magdalena became this so-called high priestess of blood, she was literally just a girl. Just a girl. And if I'm honest, her beginnings and how her life started is basically just as disturbing as the events that follow. And as said in that movie or musical, the beginning is a very good place to start, so we're going to go back to 1947. So, Magdalena Solís, not like Gabby Solis in Desperate Housewives, I'm very sorry to say. But Magdalena, she was born in 1947, and she was born in northeastern Mexico in a place called Tamaulipas. I'll be honest, her actual date of birth, as in, you know, the day and the month, is unknown because, well, back then, no one was really documenting the birth of a child who was born into such chaos and poverty. So 1947, that's as good as we've got. And you know, it's not ideal. I'd love to give you all the juicy deets, but it is better than a poke in the eye with a jaggy stick, so we're just gonna have to go with it. Now, I do have to say, Magdalena, she was born into the kind of environment that is either gonna foster a monster or a survivor. And to be quite honest, Magdalena, she was a bit of both. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's definitely teetering more to the side of monster, but she was also a survivor of her surroundings in her childhood. Magdalena's family, they were deep into poverty. They as a family were barely scraping by, but even more disturbing than that, they were entrenched in the world of crime. And from a very young age, Magdalena and her brother Eleazer, they were immersed into this sort of life that just normalised violence, normalised crime, brutality, exploitation, and also power through fear. And listen, that's messed up enough, right? We could really just stop there at how messed up this childhood is, but somehow, somewhere, it gets even worse. Because Magdalena and Eleazer, they would be introduced to prostitution by their parents. That's right, introduced to the world of prostitution by their own parents whilst they are still children. And their family had stated that they never introduced them to the world of sex work for them to be victims, even though they absolutely were. But her family stated that this was a means of survival. This is what they had to do. They needed money, they needed to get by. So they're just gonna pimp out their own children. No one should be having to pimp themselves out, right? But don't pimp out your children. If you're making that choice, pimp out yourself. So Magdalena and Eleazer, they were both sexually exploited by their own family. More so Magdalena, but Eleazer, he faced a lot of that as well. But for Magdalena, this just completely changed her view of the world and the people in it. So I guess for Magdalena and Eleazer, their parents weren't making them pack lunches and sending them off to school. Unless that school was called the School of Trauma, then possibly. The kind of upbringing that these children had is literally the kind of upbringing that would send you to therapy. And then the therapist giving you therapy is probably going to need therapy themselves because it's that messed up. Now, Magdalena, she would garner her own views on sex from a very, very young age, and she never ever thought of sex being intimate or something that you do to connect with a partner or something you do for enjoyment. To her, it was about control. It was a currency that she could use to get what she wanted. And later, this would become a tool for domination. And it's just devastating to think that the only thing that was stable in this young girl's life was trauma. If trauma was an Olympic sport, my God, her parents would be on the first podium. They'd be winning gold in the trauma Olympics because the things that they were putting on to this child from a young age is disturbing and evil. And I am sure that this will come as no shock to anybody considering what Magdalena's been through. But she really suffered with her mental health. Now, sadly, back then, there was no formal diagnosis given to Magdalena, and so there was no formal treatment that she received. But several psychological experts and forensic psychologists who would study her behaviour years later, they believed that there was some kind of delusional disorder that she was suffering from. Some thought paranoid schizophrenia, others thought borderline personality disorder. And if you mix one of these or both of these with her traumatic childhood, extreme poverty, the incestuous control that was going on within her family, then yeah, you pretty much get the perfect storm. And whilst chaos continued to follow Magdalena, it got to a point where she would learn how to manipulate this in a way that worked out best for her. Even as a young teenager, Magdalena had showed signs that she could be very, very cunning. She was able to mirror people's expectations and also be able to slip herself into a role within the group that gave her complete control. She could be seductive, submissive, obedient, or savage, depending on what the situation was. Any situation she was in, she could almost flip her personality to best cope with it. Now, for just a second, let's talk about Hernandez Solís, the brother, the protector, the pimp, and possibly the romantic partner. Honestly, saying that twisted list of things that this guy was to Magdalena makes me want to throw up in my own mouth and then swallow it. I'm sorry, that was disgusting, but it's true. So there are multiple sources that state that Magdalena and Eleazer had an incestuous sexual relationship from the time that they were teenagers. And I mean, their whole view of sex and intimacy was messed up since they were children anyway, so, they probably didn't really realise that there was much wrong with that dynamic, given what they grew up in. We don't know whether it was coercive, consensual, or just born from the mutual trauma that they shared, but what was very clear going through Magdalena's teenage years and early womanhood was that Eleazer, he held a massive psychological influence over Magdalena. Now, Eleazer, he was violent, he was manipulative, he was already involved in lower level crime by the time that he was a young adult. And Magdalena, she clung to this guy like he was a lifeline. He was all that she knew. And again, was this a trauma bond? Was it just sheer survival? Or was this through loyalty? We don't really know, because they're both so incredibly messed up from the childhood that they had. Now together, the pair of them, they became grifters and hustlers, and they were running cons all across Mexico. Now Magdalena, she was utilised for her looks. She was used as bait to lure people in. She was used as almost a distraction whilst Eleazer was able to blackmail or rob their victims. Now the pair of them, they ran many different scams together, but their particular favourite and their usual scam of choice was religious manipulation, which is going to become incredibly ironic later, but we'll get there. So as teens in the early 1960s, Magdalena and Eleazer, they start drifting between different cities. So they're going between Monterrey, Reynosa and Nuevo Laredo. The pair of them would often work with pimps or small-time gangsters, and they were trafficking sex, and they were also running protection rackets. And people who cross paths with Magdalena in particular, they would be mesmerised by her beauty, but they would also find out very quickly that this might be one of the most calculated young women they have ever come across. And people would very quickly fear her before they would start to worship her. She had this energy and this magneticness that although she was someone you absolutely feared, you also kind of worshipped the ground that she walked on. But even at this moment in time, Magdalena, she wasn't showing any signs of psychosis or delusions yet. It's coming, don't worry. But to outsiders looking in at this moment, she was a survivor, she was a hardened person, and she was just emotionally ice cold. Again, surviving mechanisms, things, walls that she's building up to protect herself. And you're probably wondering, well, Anna, what changed this? You know, why did she become delusional? Why did she become psychotic? Well, enter the Hernandez brothers. They're important to the story. It was around 1963 when Magdalena and Eleazer would cross paths with the Hernandez brothers. Now, these brothers... Let me tell you about these brothers. They were two scam artists. They thought they were the absolute bee's boss. They would claim to people that they were two prophets sent by God. Tale as old as time. And when Magdalena and Eleazer would finally cross paths with these two brothers, that is when the deadliest of deadly transformations would take place. Because these brothers, they didn't just bring Magdalena into this cult, they brought her into this cult and gave her the power and control that she has desired her entire life. And let's just say she had a lot of pent-up rage and anger for the things that she went through. And you know what? Rightly so. But that's what therapy is for. But for Magdalena, her therapy would be killing people, which I'm sure we can all agree is not politically correct. So, the Hernandez brothers, we've got Santos and Cayetano. And they were classic grifters. There was no sort of special enlightenment that had happened along the way. They were just two sleazy con men who were looking for fast money. So they were born into poverty, much like Magdalena and Eleazer, and they had learned that, you know what, if you can't gain people's trust, might as well just steal it. And in their minds, the best way of stealing the trust would be through manipulation. Religious manipulation. So in 1962, the brothers, they had set their sights on a small rural village, and this rural village was called Yerba Buena. And Yerba Buena, this was tucked away in this little mountainous region in Nueva Leon. Now, in this tiny rural village, there was no schools, there was no electricity. People here were very much illiterate and also isolated, which to the Hernandez brothers made them the perfect victims. Because when they stood back and looked at this community as a whole, they didn't see something that they wanted to try and build up and fix and help. They simply seen it as an opportunity. So these brothers, they would arrive and they had claimed to be prophets of the Inca god who was sent there to rebuild a sacred temple and also choose their divine followers. So trying to make the people of this town, this small rural region, feel important and feel seen for the first time and like they serve more of a purpose in life. They just made up this half-baked mythology. They were claiming to the villagers that the gods were returning and they were just sent as the messengers. They just swarmed up one day and they're like, yep, God told me I'm hot, I'm in charge, and hand over your livestock. And these people believed them. And you're probably wondering why. The reason that these people had bought into the Hernandez brothers' mythology was because they were promised eternal riches and salvation if the villagers followed them faithfully, paid tribute, and obeyed. These guys just walked up one day and they're like, hey, you ever heard of a pyramid scheme with a twist? The twist being murder. And let's be real, when people are so isolated and so desperate, someone rocking up and saying that they basically have magical powers, that they've been sent from God, sounds a lot more plausible than someone saying, don't worry, help is coming. Like, it is a bad day in society when it sounds more likely that people have powers. And the Hernandez brothers, as soon as they had these villagers on board, they were just using and abusing them. They were spouting this fake religion to them. They were conducting sexual exploitation. They were sleeping with the villagers, telling them that they had to do it. They were just manipulating this power and collecting offerings that were in the form of labour, food, and money. Now, thankfully, it wouldn't be too long before this scam started to fall apart, and the villagers, they started questioning the Hernandez brothers' divinity. And when the Hernandez brothers hear that there's talk of like a union forming, they realise very quickly, damn, we're gonna need something or someone within this cult that makes it unquestionable. Something that people can't say no to. Something or someone that the people will believe in. That almost proves the mythology that we are spouting. So in early 1963, Santos Hernandez, he would head back to Monterrey. And the reason he went back here is because he had some underworld connections. And when he returned here, this is when he would finally meet Magdalena and Eleazer Solis. At the point when he met the two, Magdalena, she was working as a teenage sex worker, and Eleazer was her pimp and her enforcer. Santos was immediately captivated, specifically by Magdalena, and he believed that Magdalena was someone who could trick the villagers into believing their mythology. So he offered Magdalena and Eleazer money, but also power, which, as we know, Magdalena, she craves power. And this was giving her this important starring role in this religious scheme that she had always craved. How could she turn it down? After all, this Santos guy who's just walked up one day, he's promised Magdalena that he will worship her as an incarnation of the goddess. And not only this, but she can have full, complete, utter control over the followers. And here's the kicker when it comes to Magdalena, right? Because she wasn't just playing along with this delusion. She actually fully bought into the delusion, and she believed that she was a goddess. Yeah, no, there's a tripped wire in there somewhere. She is a sandwich short of a picnic, because this woman who got picked up off the streets one day now believes that she is a goddess, an enforcer, and this belief that she had would be the thing that changed everything for the worse. So when Magdalena and Eleazer, they arrive in Yerba Buena, and they didn't blend in, because they weren't trying to blend in. They very much wanted to stand out, specifically Magdalena. So from the moment they entered Yerba Buena, they took over. The Hernandez brothers, they introduced Magdalena to the villagers as the incarnation of Coatlicue, who was the Aztec goddess of death, earth, and rebirth. You know, as a villager, I would just want to pump the brakes at death, because what do you mean she's a goddess of death? What can one expect from a goddess of death? And it was likely that this name had just been picked out of thin air, but to Magdalena, she was now officially the goddess of death, earth, and rebirth. She was eat, sleeping, and breathing it. She believed it. She genuinely thought she was the incarnation of Coatlicue. And at this point, so did the villagers. So Magdalena, really just embracing her incarnation role, she starts speaking to the villagers in ritualistic tones. I don't know if that's a ritualistic tone, but it would draw me in. She was also dressing in these very long robes. She was doing ceremonial blessings. But not only this, she would punish anyone who questioned her stance. Now, people had reported that she would often have episodes of glossolalia, which is when she was speaking in tongues during these rituals. Somebody call a priest. And not only this, but very soon after learning to speak in tongues, she was soon demanding blood sacrifices. And honestly, when I first heard this, I was like, oh damn, like the villagers must have been terrified when they first hear of Quatalique wanting these blood sacrifices. But it turns out that to start with, these were purely symbolic, and the blood was from animals only, mostly goats or chickens. So the villagers are kind of looking around at each other like, well, I'm not a goat and you're not a goat or a chicken, so we should be safe. But that would all quickly change. Because as time went on for Magdalena Quatalique, animal blood was no longer good enough. And she starts telling the followers that the gods require human blood, and anyone who disbelieves this are heretics, and their death would purify the group. I'd be shaken now. And guys, honestly, when the goddess of your group and of your cult starts to tell you the vibes are off, someone must die, it's probably time to leave. Now, within this cult at the time, there was 2 teenage boys, right? And we all know what teenage boys are like, and teenage girls. Men, I'm not hating on you, but teenage boys, they're a bit feral and they'll just say whatever comes to mind, and sometimes that can be pretty offensive, okay? But Magdalena had heard these teenage... Why is my doorbell going? I've not ordered anything, have I? Don't think so. I'm scared. Let me go check. So I just went to check, couldn't see anyone at my door, so it's either chapped or run, or I've got spirits. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, right, so we've got 2 teenage boys in the cult who are basically questioning and doubting Magdalena's divinity, and she's not having it. When Magdalena got word of this, she had decided that this was actually treason against the gods, and something had to be done. So the next ritual that had been organised by Magdalena was actually a punishment ritual to these teenage boys. And she brought all the followers in on this, and these 2 teenage boys, they were beaten for hours with sticks, with machetes, just endlessly. And once these young boys were unconscious, Magdalena and Eleazer, they would then step forward and slit the throat of these young boys and then drink their blood. And this woman, when she drank the blood, she wasn't faking it, and she didn't even flinch. There was no like, when she was swallowing it and tasting it, it was going down like wine. She truly believes at this point that blood gives her power, and that her rule over these followers was now sealed. These villagers, they were absolutely horrified, but they were too terrified to speak out because Magdalena's made it very clear. Anyone who talks back, anyone who does not believe her, you're next. To be on the end of the stick that was hitting someone else than on the end of the stick or machete that you were getting hit by. She was telling these followers that the deaths of, well, she didn't call them victims, but in this case they are absolutely victims. But she said that the deaths of these traitors, basically, they were a sacrifice that had to be made to sustain the goddess. Well, we're not sure if we like you as a goddess, so can we stop doing them and just see if you like disappear? Now, obviously in this case, there's more followers than there is leaders, right? Because we've basically got the Hernandez brothers, Magdalena and Eleazer. But there's a whole village full of followers, people who are under their rule. Ultimately, Magdalena knew that if this whole village revolted, they didn't really stand a chance. So to keep the cult obedient and docile, her and Eleazer, they were using a combination of sleep deprivation, hallucinogenic drugs, sexual coercion, public beatings, and bloodletting rituals. Not only this, but they had convinced the villagers that Magdalena could see into the minds of her followers, and if she saw into their mind and seen that there was any doubts or any doubtful thoughts going on, thinking that they might leave her or try and escape the cult, they would be punished immediately. And with these terrifying beliefs in place, this entire group, they just descended into complete submission. And from 1963 to 1964, there would be at least 6 other ritualistic killings. These were all done publicly as a way to keep the other followers obedient, you know, to teach them a lesson. If you speak out, if you doubt me, this is what's going to happen to you. But these poor victims, they were just people who maybe spoke their mind or maybe didn't even say anything at all. Because Magdalena, she can see into people's minds. And suddenly they're being publicly executed in front of and by the fellow cult members. And again, being brutally beaten in the exact same way with machetes, with sticks, for hours. It really just depended on how long it would take them to go unconscious. Before Magdalena and Eleazer, they would step in and slit their throats. Before then drinking their blood and sometimes forcing other followers to do the same. And it really is just terrifying and shocking because this cult was just driven by complete cruelty. There was nothing more to it than that. They enjoyed this cruelty. It was always Magdalena and Eleazer who got to choose the next victim, who got to stage the next ritual, who forced the other followers to participate. Sometimes these followers were holding down these defenseless victims to allow them to be beaten so brutally, unable to fight back. And then after it, when the blood's been shared, they would all drink it as a group, believing that this brings them spiritual enlightenment. Someone, please have a word. And it does get to a certain point where the lines between coercion and complicity get completely blurred because, okay, these people were terrified that they might be next. But apparently, allegedly, according to others that were there, some followers really started to enjoy this sadistic, cruel punishment that was being inflicted into others. And I think it's safe to say that at this point, it's no longer a religious scam. This is a full-blown doomsday death cult. And by early 1964, this tiny village of Yerba Buena had suddenly become this secret prison. At least 8 people are now dead. Their bodies have been completely drained of their blood in these crazy ass rituals. Others in the group were physically and psychologically broken by this woman who thinks she's like a divine goddess. Magdalena, she's so freaking delusional, she's now going by the Priestess of Blood. Because she's just crossed so many lines, the final line being from complete delusion to just complete deadliness. And like many other cults, Magdalenas would end in panic, murder, and one final gruesome discovery. Because after more than 1 year of Magdalena's complete control, it would finally start to fracture. Her rituals, they had become more extreme, they had become longer, they were bloodier. Survivors would later testify that Magdalena would keep her followers awake for days on end, leaving them completely sleep deprived and delirious. She would keep them up by constant chanting of this rubbish that she was spouting. There was 4 sexual ceremonies, and if this didn't work, she would revert to violence, the thing that she knows best. She would beat her followers if, God forbid, they tried to have a nap. And at this point, this crazy ass woman is just looking for any reason to berate and beat her followers. Any tiny thing they done could be seen as spiritual betrayal. God, if you blinked too much during a prayer, spiritual betrayal. If you forgot a tiny bit of the chant, spiritual betrayal. And God forbid if you looked scared or tired, spiritual betrayal. Now listen, I would not last a second because I have what I can only describe as chronic dry eye, and depending on the weather conditions that day, I'm going to be blinking quite a lot when the dry eye kicks in. So it's safe to say I would be the next victim in line because you're not going to stop me, Magdalena, okay? Unless you've got my eye drops, which I highly doubt. And not only this, but by 1964, this crazy woman, she was killing people weekly. And this finally brings us to the final victim in this case, Sebastian Guerrero. Sebastian Guerrero, he was a 14-year-old boy who just lived on the outside of Yerba Buena. Now, he wasn't a member of this cult, he wasn't a follower, he was simply a curious child. So one day he is out exploring his surroundings and he is in this cave system which he didn't realise was utilised by this ritualistic cult. And when he stumbles across this cult, they're conducting one of their rituals. He sees and hears them chanting around a fire. There's this woman who is Magdalena, and she's standing over a bound man. Not only this, but this 14-year-old little boy, he would witness this man's blood being poured into a cup and drank. I mean, could you imagine being a 14-year-old? I'd be rubbing my eyes like, is this a mirage of some sort? Because what the hell? This young boy was so terrified and completely freaked out that he just bolted away from this ritual. He ran to the nearest police station in Villagran. He told police exactly what was going on and where it was happening, but the police wouldn't go out until the next day. When they went out the next day, there was no sign of Sebastian Guerrero, because this cult, they had found out that this young boy had spoke and they would dispose of him. This young boy, Magdalena, had ordered that he be captured, and not only that he be tortured and sacrificed. And this would be done in a ritual that was even more brutal than the others. This young boy's heart would be cut out and his blood would be publicly drank and enjoyed by Magdalena and Eleazer. When Sebastian Guerrero had never returned, the police did quickly notice. After what this young boy described, there is no way that they could just brush this under the carpet and think that he's just went into hiding. Several officers from Monterrey and Nuevo Leon, they had launched a formal investigation. And I'm not going to lie, some of them were very sceptical at first. Some of them didn't believe what the young boy had said, what he said he had seen, and they believed that maybe he had just ran away. But there was a few police officers that were absolutely convinced that what this terrified young boy said he seen, he absolutely did. And they wanted to get to the bottom of it and find out where he had went. And when they start their investigation in Yerba Buena, what they would find is silence, fear, and missing people. So police officers, they start questioning the residents and followers of this cult, and it's at this point where the cult's in full panic mode. Like, Magdalena, this is not what you promised us. I thought we were getting like eternal salvation and riches, and here I am being strip searched by the police with a rubber glove. Magdalena, she then ordered some of her most intoxicated, delusional followers to ambush the police with machetes, rocks, sticks, whatever they could to try and kill them. But this was a huge mistake on Magdalena's part, because this only triggered a full-blown police investigation. They were leaving no stone unturned. In the cave systems where these rituals were said to take place, they would be stormed by the police. And what they found was completely chilling. They would find 2 freshly buried bodies. There was also remnants of ritual sites, so there was animal carcasses, there was blood-stained altars, just truly creepy stuff. There was bones, robes, skulls, ceremonial items, drug paraphernalia that had been used to sedate and manipulate the cultists. Is that a word? Cultists? I don't know, but the followers. They also found several emaciated cult followers who were still alive, but they were barely coherent. They were on their way out. They were ready to die. When the police found all of this, there was no doubt that something sinister and deadly was going on. I mean, hello, they've just found 2 freshly buried bodies and skulls and, you know, stuff like that, so quite clearly. But they immediately would arrest Magdalena and Eleazer, and honestly, they were captured without any sort of resistance. Magdalena was apparently even smiling when she had been caught. So the Solis siblings, they would be transported to Monterrey, and it was here where their case would shock the entire country. Keep in mind, at this point in 1964, people haven't really heard of a death cult, let alone one that is led by a teenage girl who is claiming to be a blood priestess. Now, during interrogation, Magdalena, she didn't confess. She just kept on proclaiming her divinity to the police, over and over and over and over again, like, Magdalena, babe, give it up. She had told investigators, I am immortal. They will never get rid of me. I mean, we can all pray, Magdalena, babe. Now, she would be diagnosed with severe psychosis, but she wasn't deemed legally insane. The court, they had determined that she had pathological religious delusions and sociopathic narcissism. Can't argue with that. Magdalena and Eleazer, they would be charged with multiple counts. So there was multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, sexual coercion, assault, and child endangerment. This trial, it wasn't widely publicised, and it's believed that that was due to the religious elements within the case. But both Eleazer and Magdalena, they would be found guilty on all charges. Magdalena Solís, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. At this point in time, this was the maximum sentence she could receive for the crimes that she had committed. Now, Eleazer, he received the same. Should it have been more? Absolutely. And the thing is, the more survivors that came forward, the more people believed that Magdalena and Eleazer, they had gotten off too easy, because they believed that the victim count was at least 20 or higher. And these victims, it didn't just include adults, there was children in there, really, really young children, younger than teenage years. But without any forensic technology or any documentation, keeping record of what happened, only 8 could be confirmed. After the trial, Magdalena, she was sent to a prison near her birthplace, and she completely disappeared from any sort of court records and documents from the 1980s onwards. Many people believe that she died in prison, but there's a large amount of people that believe that she was released quietly and just disappeared. There is speculation of what Magdalena looked like, but to this very day, there is no photograph of her that's been confirmed to be the woman herself. And to this very day, Magdalena Solís, she remains one of the only confirmed female cult leaders in history to directly commit ritualistic, religiously motivated murders. Most female serial killers are known to operate through poison, manipulation, accomplices, but Magdalena Solís didn't. She was more than willing to get the blood on her own hands. Many psychologists over the years, they have directly compared Magdalena to Elizabeth Bathory, who, if you don't know her, I've already covered a case on her. I'll put it up here, but also in the description down below if you want to watch it. It is crazy. And some had even compared her to a female Charles Manson, but saying that she was more successful in her control of her followers. But what is so crazy about her case is that she didn't start the cult. She was simply brought into it, and then within weeks, she had gained complete control. But my loves, that is it for the case of Magdalena Solís and her brother Eleazer. I feel like it should have been about the Solís siblings, but I guess it was more aimed at Magdalena. I honestly can't believe that this case is lesser known and not spoken about, considering how insane it is. But hey, that's why I'm here. I'm always going to try and find the lesser unknown cases, you know me. Please let me know down below exactly what you think of this case, but let me know your thoughts, feelings, opinions down below, because I am very excited and interested to know what you think about this case and what the hell do you think about Magdalena. Don't forget that you can leave your case suggestions in the comments down below, or you can send them to me via email, which will be linked down below for you, alongside my social media handles, my TikTok, my Instagram, and also the product details of everything I've used on my face today. But that is it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this one, or, that's always the wrong word, but I hope you found it interesting. I hope you learned something new. Please, please, please remember, be a good person. Do not be a bad person. Stay safe. Look after each other. Don't start a cult. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!